right, we're back. Let's get started. I'm going to ask you a question, Sonja.
Yeah.
Did you ever expect to live the life you are living now?
How could I? I think that growing up, you have all these expectations of what life should be. And we're so used to having those fairy tales of happily ever after. But do we ever question what the happily ever after is? And I think that's sort of the phase that I feel that I'm in. Not that it's all rainbows and sunshine, but is it what I expected it to be? No, because I probably expected princesses and fairy tales. But I mean, it has the basis. It has the basis of a family, which I was lucky enough to find and build of my own. It has the basis of a career that I wanted to take very seriously, of loving friends. Those were the aspects that I expected for myself, or maybe hoped would be a better way to put it. So it's a yes and no. It has the elements, but did I picture this? No. Did I picture all the different highs and lows in my life? Hell no.
So from going from princess to reality.
Yeah.
There's always one subject that you and I discuss frequently, and I thought today would be a great day to bring it on, which is about claiming space, especially from the princess mentality that you were raised with to claiming space of as a woman of today when things don't look very princessy. What does that really mean for you?
Well, the claiming space for me was probably a lesson of being an adult is hard. I had no idea that I had to claim my space. I think still somehow growing up, and I don't know whether that you hear a lot of being a woman and we don't claim our space. And, I tended to make myself very small and very convenient for everybody and very pleasing for everybody. And I made myself smaller for everybody to be comfortable. So not claiming my space felt like I was disappearing. And claiming my space for me feels that I have to, for myself, consider my needs, my feelings, and values in everything that I do and in all the decisions that I make. And that's not very princessy. Princess gets tended to her needs. I mean, well, I should be the one that tends to my needs.
So when did you get the wake-up call?
I think I had many, but the one that made me really wake up was my burnout. I was just unable to do anything. I was in survival mode. I realized that I was just basically in so much in doing everything for everybody. I was like driving a car, but I lost my voice or anything to tell people that I wanted to go somewhere. So I was driving everybody around, listening to music that I did not want to hear, not taking any bathroom breaks, just to keep on moving, but not considering myself anymore. So I literally broke down. That was the best wake up call I could ever get to stop doing what I did.
So a lot of people suffer burnout, right? There's a lot about it in the talks, and there's a lot about it to the point that people even become numb to it.
Yeah.
So how did you, and to accept that you're going through a burnout must have been like it's an in your face situation because it does something you intrinsically, at least that's what I remembered. So when was that moment? Can you go back to that moment where you realized that you had to accept the fact that you had a burnout? Or how did that moment arrive? What did you have to realize for that moment?
I was afraid to climb up the stairs. While in survival mode, I get very clumsy because my head and my body are not in sync. So I let things drop down a lot. But I also fell from the stairs. And I got my ankle. Luckily, I didn't have to go to hospital or anything, but my ankle got hurt really bad. But I just kept going. But it made me afraid of going up the stairs because I was afraid of falling. And then I hurt my foot, not from the stairs, but in the kitchen again. And that was the moment that I thought, well, this is not going well. So I had to go to the doctor for my foot. And well, she got right through it. So that was the moment that somebody else, except people from work, that said, well, I think this is not going really well. She really said, like, you're not going to work anymore. This is it. And that made me slow down. And the first thing about slowing down made me sure that I was able to go up the stairs again without any fear. That made me realize, like, this is the problem. So the moment it really hurt my body, that I knew that I was so unaligned with my head and my body, and that it made me afraid, that was a very strong realization that things has gone too far.
So I'm going to ask you a bit of a pokey question here. Women often, there's a lot when I look at marketing and I look at the way we're supposed to be. So how people always talk about women talk to women. There's always this like, I have to be a superwoman. I have to be a superwoman. I have to be a superwoman. Is that not a little counterintuitive with this claiming of the space? I mean, burning out and burning out and being this so-called superwoman, doesn't it aggravate it, or am I not seeing this? Because you're a mom and a wife and you're working and you also are in a multi-ethnic relationship. So what are your views?
It's funny because while in my burnout, I really hated the idea of having to do it all and being superwoman. But now that I've become more aware of my strength, I actually feel I am a superwoman. And not because people or I feel that society expects all of me, but no matter what I do, I am doing all of it. Even if you choose to be at home with your kids, or if you choose to be, with a woman without kids and just going for your career, no matter what you do, if you reach into that courage of yourself and your strength, you are a superwoman. I still strive for all the things that I strived for before, but it's a deliberate choice. And I factor in all the components that are now important for me. And that's my space to take into consideration all of my needs, the needs that I deem important in my family or in my career, and I set my goals accordingly. I still aim for the moon, but I don't have to be there in one day. It's now okay if it takes longer. It's now okay if it's delayed. It's now okay if it's only halfway there, but that's my choice, and I do not let that be dictated by what I believe society believes of me. So it's more of a deliberate choice. And even on the bad days that all I could have done is just put dinner on the table, I am still superwoman. Nothing that can happen will change that.
So when it comes to then you saying, okay, I have this goal. If I don't make this goal, it's okay. Right?
Yeah.
So can high standards creep in and then you don't realize it? I mean, claiming space is a big thing, right? But what if claiming space and you go in because you say, okay, I'm like this, but now someone else does not see it your way and you have these standards. How do you work in that with that dynamic?
So when somebody else disagrees with,
what I'm getting at is in terms of comparison, right?
Yeah.
I've noticed, at least I noticed in my environment, there's sometimes often people go, I'm not like that, or I'm like that. And then the mind does this trick of like, should I be more like that? Should I be? And it collides in that high standard. So now how do you execute it? Because burning out, at least when I see clients, they're often trying to be this other version of superwoman dictated by society.
Yeah.
So how do you now navigate that?
I navigate that because I realize when I'm doing that now, and it took a lot of practice. Like I'm comparing, but I'm taking a mental note and then reflect on it later. What I had to unlearn is make all those quick and snappy decisions on, okay, so they're not like that. Should I be like that? And then take that, going into action mode already. Or then because they're saying they're not like that and the standard should be there, I would give in or be convinced by that a lot faster. And I now give myself time and actually space to reflect on that, whether to see that if that's actually something that I agree with. Am I comparing myself? Is this for me? And my favorite question that you taught me, like, if I weren't a people pleaser, would I do this? So it's my space. I also need that space to reflect on all of those aspects to make sure that I'm still in the driver's seat and going where I want to go and listening to the music that I want to listen on the road. So it's deliberate choices in every aspect. And it's so easy to say that because that takes so much time and effort to implement.
So you said listening to the music that I want to listen to. All right. I'm going to share with the audience if you're okay with that. You're in a relationship that is multi-ethnic. You have you are born and raised in the Netherlands. Your partner is from Curacao. And then you lived in Curacao initially, and then you moved back to the Netherlands. And that's also culturally, there's a difference right there. Being a superwoman.
The two bonus kids that moved to the Netherlands with us that are born and raised from Curacao as well. Yeah.
So with all of that, now being a superwoman, does that redefine it for you as compared to what is usually out there?
I felt that, before I thought that a superwoman was defined by society, somebody who did it all and made it look easy. Yeah, so I had to redefine that for myself. And I also think that give my experience in Curacao and with a partner from a different culture makes you also reflect on society and its cultural norms differently, because you really are immersed in a world where things are done and thought of differently than yours. So there's a certain flexibility that starts to grow there as well.
So what were the main challenges you faced? Because you had to, I'm trying to figure out from a woman's perspective. You go in, you had challenges.
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter also happened at that time during COVID. You had moved back. So how did you reconcile everything whenever all that comes on, besides career, besides being a mom? How did you navigate and manage that? What are your challenges you faced?
The main challenges for me was getting behind what is driving people. So when you establish a relationship, especially when you're from different cultures, so what do you view as right or wrong or positive or negative, and where is that coming from? Yeah. So just recognizing that there's another layer, also language wise, and another layer in everything. I had to learn that there is no right or wrong. And my favorite, if I think back of my time in Curacao and establishing that relationship, my favorite scene that I have in my head is we were trying to have a discussion and we were so not aligned. And what I said to my partner was that, listen, I understand that you're explaining me how things are done here on Curacao in a relationship. I understand that. However, I feel that we need to build this relationship regardless of where we are. So we need to build it, whether we're in Curacao, whether we're in the Netherlands, whether we move to China or wherever we go. It's us defining what's our family, what's our relationships going to like. It's family norms and values, regardless of the place. I still don't know whether he agrees with that after all this time. But I do see that that's what we tried to build in there. What I also recognize is even though I was the one suggesting that, my space in that throughout the whole relationship has not been consistent because I have been modifying maybe a little bit too much because of all the expectations I thought people had of me.
So, did you judge yourself? This is a question I always, want to ask, but it's always like, should I ask this or not? Did you feel worse for having those privileges? When they talk about white privilege a lot now, how do you navigate that storm throughout? Because it's a partnership and, you're having all this other stuff from outer circumstances coming in. How did you navigate that? Being, like you said, I'm a superwoman, I have to go through that. And letting go. What did you have to let go of as a woman? And what did you have to give in? And vice versa, because you are claiming space differently here.
Oh, there's so many things popping up in my head right now. I think with the whole discussion about white privilege, it did make me, first of all, it makes me reflect. And I think the reflection comes most when I talk about this poem. I wrote a poem about white privilege. And we now have a son and a daughter together, Sherman and I, who are then biracial. So it was a poem about white privilege, about, of course, all the motherly love that you have and that you want your kids to have, even better than what you were given when you were growing up. So the underlying tone is that I wished my kids would have the same privilege that I had, which made me also, which nobody in my class, however, gotten through, but which made me also feel very guilty of, wishing my kids had that white privilege because it's still white privilege. So that's a struggle that I still have also. You recognize it, but there's also guilt. And I think that the whole healing of society comes with those reflections and that understanding. So that's a conflict that I had in myself. It also, especially with the whole Black Lives Matters involvement, like it was 3 years ago, it made it easier for us also as a family to discuss certain things, especially with my partner, but also just discussing an approach on how he could communicate when things were being asked or being said that he was uncomfortable with. So even as a family, we discussed certain replies that we would give because he would, like, I think many people of color were so fed up with things. And if you can say how you feel, but then you get a certain discussion that you don't want to get into, and it's too often too many. So we were able to formulate responses that he was comfortable giving in certain situations. And the other things that popped up, actually, I forgot right now.
Were there moments where, like you said, you were formulating the questions, you all were working through it together? How did that support him with his authenticity? Because you're working through that and you're saying also there's guilt associated. How do you navigate that? Because I'm sure it must still be, like you said, it's hard because it's an ongoing process. So what could you share with the audience? Let's put it that way. That they could say, okay, without having that guilt in there.
I still struggle with that guilt. But I think it was also liberating for my partner that he understood that I struggled with that guilt as well. And I think that it meant a lot for him that I recognized, or at least I said to him, well, but all this racist and discrimination, it's not a problem of people of color, it's a problem of white people. So if they're asking you a question in a way that offends you, you're already in the defending corner. That you're already not ahead, but I don't know the word in English.
What is it in Dutch?
A
step back.
Yeah, you're already starting with a step back. So tell them that. You can tell them that you feel that you're that you're being pushed in a corner to defend yourself. Well, that's not really the problem. And there were actually some conversations also that because we talked about that, we were with friends. We were having a conversation about Black Lives Matters, and he said, "Well, I feel that I'm a step back right now." And he asked me, actually, from a white point of view, to address our white friends about some dynamics, so he could be comfortable, because he was not comfortable having those discussions because he was hurt. So we joined up as a team. And for me, having those discussions with people of color, that's where my guilt comes in, and I have to recognize that the discussion might be sensitive also for me, and I don't, and that has nothing to do with not recognizing that the discussion is not sensitive for the other person, but I have to be mindful of my white guilt and what it does with me and how I respond. And I was able in those discussions with white people to say, well, this is a white problem, and let's discuss it as it is, because as he is not the problem. Does that make sense? It's still very difficult for me to discuss it, and I would not do it. I could only do it like that because he gave the word to me.
So to me, what it sounds like is like there has to be a level of respectfulness and consent. I'm not, don't know if the word is consent, but it seems as close to that a consent that the two of you as a team is going to work through this together. So it is, being so that it's so complex. And then like you said, you go into a different space and then you have the guilt there, but then you go in another space and it's not the guilt, but there is another form of it. So so to me, I think of the word respect and consent that comes to mind. And there's also a lot of judgments. Like everybody will always say, yeah, but that's still not enough. Yes, but that's still not enough. And when I hear that is not enough, I feel very exhausted personally, because I'm multi-ethnic and I fit nowhere sometimes. And then still it's always like, oh, but it's still not enough. And I go, well, at a certain point, I'm like, well, I feel like I'm constantly living up to an expectation here. And that leads to a burnout to some extent. And I'm not talking just one side, I'm talking about all sides. So how do you, and you say, okay, it's still hard, but how do you stay in your space? What is it for you? What can you suggest to the audience finding themselves in that pressurized moment?
How do I say my space? It's taking that step back, taking that space, because it's so easy to go into all of those thoughts and opinions and everything. It's really taking a step back and not always responding. I really, what you said about multi-ethnicity and then not fitting in somewhere, that has become very clear for me the last few years as well. And it's so weird, isn't it, that you just, there are people that seem to not, there's no box for them. Like we put everybody in a box. Oh, that's white, that's Curacao, that's Surinamese, but there are people that don't fill in that one box. I take all those feelings and I try to not always respond to that at that moment, but see what that means for me and if I can do anything about it. Even if it's just writing a poem or if it's having conversations at home or with friends, but to sort it out like that, because often it's so complex you don't have an answer or an opinion. You probably have a judgment right away, but that's not always valid. But you always have an opinion or a feeling about it that you have to explore. And space is about exploring those feelings and opinions.
I really like that. I'm going to end it up on that note, because that is a really nice little drop of something to leave behind for the audience. About your judgment is about allowing it to be explored in your space, and that would be claiming space. You kept saying twice or three times about your poetry. Or have you published this poetry publicly, or are we still keeping it in the cupboard?
I'm
and
still
are you planning to share it?
I'm not quite sure. Doing this podcast was also claiming my space of realizing that I have a voice that's allowed a space, and I'm still struggling with claiming that space for my artistry. endeavors. So for my poetry, yeah.
So I
But
think you're going to have to let me know so I can share it out. It'd be really nice because it might inspire someone out there. So I'll leave that with the thought. So thank you very much, Sonja.
thank you.
And I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.